With the recent announcement of a brand new sonic screwdriver for Doctor Who's 60th anniversary celebrations, I thought what better time than to look back on the history of the sonic screwdriver than now. As much as people tend to bemoan the usage of the sonic screwdriver in recent years, I can't help but always be fascinated by a new sonic screwdriver design, and I would never truly want the sonic screwdriver to go away for that reason alone. At this stage, it's pretty much as big of a part of the iconography of Doctor Who as the lightsabers are to Star Wars. Naturally then, with this passion for sonic screwdrivers, I naturally have opinions as to what I prefer or don't prefer to see in my sonic screwdrivers. So I thought I'd count down all of the sonic screwdrivers from worst to best in terms of their design, in my own personal opinion. A couple of ground rules for this list are as follows. The Doctor has to have used the sonic at one point or another, so that excludes things like the sonic trowel or laser screwdriver. I'm also not going to be including devices that don't really fit the screwdriver description, for example things like the sonic cane. However, there is going to be one exception to this, which I'll get to in a sec. The sonics also have to have at least one physical prop that exists, so I'm not going to include things like the Time Lord Victorious 10th Doctor Sonic, because as far as I know, that was never made into a physical prop. So by my count, there's 13 Sonics to go through. Now you may be saying, hang on, your title said 14. Are you lying to me, Tharies? No! I have a dishonourable mention to make first. The Sonic sunglasses. I didn't want to include these on the main list because frankly, as I said in my introduction, they're not a screwdriver. They are a piece of, as the 12th Doctor says, wearable technology. And I've hated these things since the moment I first laid my eyes on them. I think they're tacky, I think they look cheap, I don't really like the jokes around them, like the browser history joke in my opinion gets really old, and I'm just not a big fan of the sort of midlife crisis arc that they kind of represent for the 12th Doctor. I also hate that despite the fact that at the end of Series 9, Capaldi gets his own sonic screwdriver, he still feels the need to wear the sonic sunglasses in addition to them, so he has two sonic devices for no real reason when they both serve the same purpose. The only time these really were needed, I guess, was during the blindness arc, but even then, I've just never liked to look at these things. I've always thought they look cheap. There's no visible button on the side of the glasses. They are just a pair of plastic glasses that they put a sound effect over the top of, and I've always thought it looked incredibly tacky, and I was so glad when a new Sonic was brought along, and quite frankly, I'm glad we've never seen anything like it since. I'd much sooner just stick to a screwdriver. But with that out the way, let's get into the rest of the list. In 13th place, I feel rather bad because it was always going to be here. We have the Sonic Lance as used by the 6th Doctor. Now once again, this isn't technically a screwdriver, however, apparently during Robot, the 4th Doctor uses the sonic screwdriver as some form of sonic lance, so I guess I could count it on this list, and like with the sonic sunglasses, it is used in a similar capacity to the sonic screwdriver. And if there's one thing I can say about this design, it's incredibly 80s. You look at it and you think, yeah, that's definitely a product of its time. It sort of looks like a mixture between a TV remote and a calculator, with its big primary colour blue and red body, and plethora of different sized buttons. It's definitely something that's a product of its time, and it's quite garish, which I suppose in a sense fits with the 6th Doctor. However, visually, I've never found this one particularly pleasing to look at. Yeah, overall, it's not a design I really click with, but I don't hate it. I don't really hate any of the designs on this list, to be honest. Unlike with TARDIS Interiors, where I'm a lot more vocal about each iteration of them. In 12th place, we have the 2nd Doctor's sonic screwdriver. Once again, I feel a little bit mean putting this as low down as it is, because this was the Sonic that started them all, and it originally wasn't the super tool that it is now, and I'll give it props, it actually does do what its namesake suggests. We actually get to see it unscrew a screw, which is pretty cool, I guess. But when you boil down this design, it's essentially just a long metal tube with a light at the end. And I know a lot of people actually think that that's quite nice, and they like the simplicity of that. And honestly, I can completely understand that. But when I'm looking at sonic screwdriver designs, which I unfortunately do quite regularly, I don't tend to go back to look at the 2nd Doctor sonic screwdriver, just because it's not that visually appealing to look at for very long. Whereas with some of the later entries on this list, even if perhaps in some cases you might argue they have more glaring design issues, they are at least fun conversation pieces, whereas with this, it's a tool in the show that serves its purpose and serves that purpose well, but doesn't do much beyond that to really intrigue me. In 11th place, we have the 13th Doctor's sonic screwdriver as used by Jodie Whittaker. Now, I will say, I don't think this sonic screwdriver is quite as bad as some people might say. I know for a fact I've been quite harsh on this sonic before, and in truth, it's not a terrible idea. I actually don't mind the idea of the Doctor cobbling together a sonic out of a bunch of different elements. Some like human-based stuff like spoons, also alien technology from the Stanza. I think there's a lot of potential in the Doctor constructing their own sonic. Where this really falls apart for me is in the execution. It just looks quite cumbersome to hold. I've never particularly cared for the shape of it. The texture looks kind of, I guess, I can't really think of the word, like tinfoil-esque. I've never been a big fan of the kind of yellow sections in the middle that break up the design. I've always kind of felt that it felt over-designed in that way. And the crystal, while it's cool to see a moving crystal, I'm not a huge fan of the shape. I much prefer more rounded lights rather than this kind of crystal that just seems to be kind of stuck on. I get what they were going for with it being something that Doctor created. However, it's just not my personal preference for a sonic screwdriver. I must say, even though I'm trying to keep personal biases out of this as much as possible, part of my dislike for this thing probably does come somewhat down to the extent at which this thing is used. There's hardly a scene that goes by where the Doctor doesn't whip it out to scan something or other. And unlike with perhaps other sonics of the modern era, where you kind of feel they're incorporated into the Doctor's movements in a very fun way, so it's almost fun to watch them use the screwdriver, like with the 11th Doctor, for example, who also, in fairness, uses sonic a lot. With Jodie's, it's always just sort of pulled out, and I hate the way she sort of, in the earlier seasons at least, sort of does the Harry Potter thing of, like, extending her arm out to, like, huge degrees to kind of do this laborious movement to open doors. I've always thought that looks kind of silly. I don't hate this design, but it's not one of my favourites. In 10th place, we have the War Doctor's sonic screwdriver as used by John Hurt in Day of the Doctor. This one's an interesting one because, much like the War Doctor himself, it's intended to bridge the gap between the classic and new series sonic screwdrivers, with the body of a classic screwdriver and the top of what's meant to be, I suppose, a revived series screwdriver with a light that's coloured red. And props to sticking to the Star Wars conventions of red means a slightly darker character, and then blue and green mean lighter characters. I think that's a really cool little detail. Don't know whether that was intentional. Honestly, I think, like with the Whittaker screwdriver though, part of the reason I don't love this is that light bulb at the top. It kind of feels just sort of placed on, and it doesn't look very visually interesting at the top. I probably have much preferred if they'd have incorporated the classic halo design from other classic screwdrivers with a light, as opposed to just sort of stick a little LED on the top of a classic screwdriver, which is what they kind of did. I don't hate it, and I actually do like that it does the flicking down action of classic screwdrivers. That is quite cool. However, I think it is just that top segment that makes this a little bit less appealing to me, because otherwise it's just a classic body, which I like, but it really is just that top section which just isn't very interesting. In 9th place, we have the 3rd Doctor's sonic screwdriver. The very first sonic screwdriver that I would argue kind of sets the precedent for what classic sonic screwdrivers would go on to be, and I do really like it. Honestly, the only reason this is below some of its other variations is the strip of yellow and black. I don't even know what material it is. Is it like a sticker on the sonic? I don't hate it, but it does feel very 70s to me, and it kind of goes some way in making the design feel less elegant and a little bit more dated. The rest of the Sonic is great. This was the first to do the iconic sort of halo design at the top of the screwdriver, and I love that. It's always looked like a really cool medical device to me, with the little metal section in the middle as well. I personally just slightly prefer the later iterations of this Sonic over this one. Not to say that this is bad. In 8th place, rather fittingly, we have the Dark Eyes sonic screwdriver. So this one counts because we have seen Paul McGann actually physically use the Dark Eyes sonic screwdriver in pictures and things. They've gone for a more woodwork finish with a sort of blue crystal at the top, which I can only assume is a means to evoke the 1996 TV movie TARDIS interior that Paul McGann was known for using. And it does work. I am personally more of a fan of metal on my screwdrivers than wood, as I feel that, unlike with the TARDIS, the screwdriver should be like a futuristic looking thing, whereas I think with the TARDIS itself, you can evoke those time machine aesthetics of H.G. Wells. That sort of context doesn't really transfer as well onto a Sonic, in my opinion. I still enjoy this Sonic a lot. I like the crystal, I like the sort of gold bits. It's a very refined sonic screwdriver, and one that I think fits a sort of Victorian-esque early 8th Doctor, which is ironic because mainly when we see this, he's sort of abandoned his Victorian clothing in favour of the sort of leather jacket and the satchel. However, nonetheless, I do enjoy this Sonic quite a bit. I wish we'd seen more of it on screen because it might actually go up in my estimations if that were the case, whereas it's mostly just relegated to Big Finish covers and comic appearances as well. I think I'd also just like it if the bottom section was a little bit more rounded and a little bit less square in shape, but that's just personal preference. In 7th place, we have the 12th Doctor's sonic screwdriver as used by Peter Capaldi. Now, I remember when this thing came out, a lot of people were saying that they really didn't like it, and I kind of see why. On a surface level, it can look quite over-designed. However, I think what sells me on this is the Doctor that it's with. It's paired with Peter Capaldi, who is an older, more mature Doctor, and I really get the sense that this is like a kind of refined, almost fancy piece of technology he would use. I like the alternating colours, they never felt that gimmicky to me. I like how it sort of visually evokes the TARDIS without being too brazen about it. The gold is actually really nice, and as I said, kind of mature looking. If there's one thing that kind of annoys me about this, it's less so the design itself and more when Peter Capaldi holds the emitter sideways rather than forwards, because surely that's where whatever he's doing comes out of the Sonic as it comes out of the emitter. So when you're holding it sideways, surely that wouldn't work, but I don't know. I've always just found that odd. This is definitely one of those Sonics that grew on me over time. However, if you still don't like it, I do completely understand why. And I think if you don't like the 12th Doctor Sonic Screwdriver, you're probably also going to have an issue with some of the more elaborate Sonic Screwdriver designs in general. I don't mind them, however I do think there is a balance that can often be struck. In 6th place, we have the 14th Doctor's Sonic Screwdriver as to be used by David Tennant. So this one was a hard one to place because it's only just been announced and we haven't actually seen it in action properly on screen yet. However, we do have on-set images as well as now proper 3D renders of this screwdriver, as well as a whole promotional video of what this screwdriver looks like and a toy version that are in people's hands. So I feel like I'm pretty safe in making my observations about this screwdriver now. I do enjoy it. At first, I wasn't sure whether I felt it was a bit too over-designed, but honestly, the more I've looked at it, the more it grows on me. One thing I will say is that I think I do prefer it with its claws shut than when its claws are open. However, I assume that the claws opening have more of a function, as in the reveal video. There's sort of lights at the top of each claw, which could be used to project some sort of HUD or something to that effect. I love the little turning bit at the bottom of the screwdriver. However, I have seen some people recolor that to be silver in design, and I will say that probably does balance out the colours a little bit. However, at the same time, I kind of like it as a reference to the isomorphic controls on the Master's laser screwdriver. On the topic of references, this screwdriver is essentially the love child of every new series sonic screwdriver, but particularly the 10th and 11th Doctor's sonic screwdriver, with the claws of the 11th Doctor's, the sort of crackle effect of the 9th and 10th Doctors, which I really like, and sort of a little bit of the Capaldi era design at the top as well. We haven't seen the full extent of this screwdriver yet. There have been some rumours about colour changing, but that's not been confirmed. So I assume we'll learn more about this sonic screwdriver as time progresses. However, at the moment, I enjoy it. The one thing I will say, and this is a criticism of the toy specifically, is the top emitter does seem quite dim out of the top, and I don't know whether that's just on the toy or whether that's going to be the case in the episodes as well, but I do hope that the emitter is nice and bright, at least in the episodes themselves. I also want to give a shout out to the little Gallifreyan insignia on the switch of the 14th Doctor's sonic screwdriver. I think that's just sort of adding to the refined nature of this Sonic. It feels like it fits perfectly with a matured Doctor, specifically a matured 10th Doctor, kind of recounting his memories in the form of a Sonic. I think it fits the narrative of the 60s really well, and it's even been confirmed in the San Diego Comic-Con sort of booth that this Sonic is specifically designed to evoke the previous screwdrivers, So I imagine that might play into the part of the narrative of this thing, whether that'll be in the sense of either the toy maker creating it to evoke that exact thing, or whether we'll see a scene early on in the 60th of maybe Tennant cobbling together a Sonic out of the remains of previous ones, is yet to be seen. But overall, I really like it as an idea, and I think it fits with being a 60th anniversary design perfectly. In 5th place, we have the Sonic Screwdriver as used by River Song. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking, well, the Doctor actually didn't use that. And to that I say he did, twice, both in Forest of the Dead, when he is uploading River to the library, as well as in Series 10, when he's gifting the Sonic to River Song. And this is essentially what is said in the narrative to be an advanced version of the 10th Doctor Sonic Screwdriver, with a red setting, dampeners, and due to its age, we eventually see it sort of get some sort of aging, sort of weathering effect, where it sort of looks like stuff has grown on it, and it's sort of gotten a lot older through usage. I really like this design. It takes what works about the 10th Doctor Sonic Screwdriver and kind of just amplifies it and updates it for River Song. I really like the little circular thing that she holds on to on the side of it. I really like the little sort of thing that we see in Silence of the Library Forest of the Dead, which shows when it's uploading something. I think that's really cool and probably could have a bunch of other use cases as well. And yeah, overall, it's just a perfectly upgraded version of the 9th and 10th Doctor Sonic Screwdriver. If I had one criticism, it would probably just be that I'm not as huge on the bottom section. I don't like the sort of ribbed bit at the bottom of the black section. And I feel like the 9th and 10th Doctor Sonic Screwdriver is just a bit of a sleeker design than this. That's not to say I don't enjoy this one a lot though. In 4th place, we have the 4th and 5th Doctor's Sonic Screwdriver. Basically, the default classic Sonic Screwdriver. The only minor difference, as far as I can tell, is that sometimes on the 5th Doctor Sonic, there's some slight white ring around a segment of the screwdriver, but from what I understand, that's mainly due to it weathering over the years of production. I think for all intents and purposes, this is meant to be the same screwdriver, and what a screwdriver it is. It's simple, effective, iconic. I love the metal of this. The metal replicas look absolutely phenomenal. It feels like a simple piece of space-age technology that just works. You know, it doesn't feel over-designed, doesn't feel cumbersome. It feels like something that was designed to be used as a tool whilst also looking sleek in the process. It's perfect. It's really, really quite good. I'd say, other than the next one, it is the best classic Sonic Screwdriver, and I would argue probably, other than maybe the 9th and 10th Doctors at this point, one of the default Sonic Screwdrivers. When you think of the Sonic Screwdriver in your head, this is one of the ones that comes up, at least for Classic Who. In 3rd place, we have the 8th Doctor Sonic Screwdriver in the TV movie, or I guess the 7th and 8th Doctors. The only real difference between this and the previous screwdriver is the fact that the halo, which is traditionally red, as we've explored on previous listings, is now silver, and the middle section is now red, as well as the fact that there is a gold ring at the bottom of the screwdriver. And I think all these little touches just kind of really go to show a kind of more refined version of that original screwdriver for a more gentlemanly Doctor, which is Paul McGann and Sylvester McCoy to an extent at the beginning of the film. I think it fits both of them well. We don't actually see it used an awful lot because for the majority of the runtime, it is in the possession of Chang Lee. However, for what it is, I really do enjoy it, and I did get a kick out of seeing it in Night of the Doctor again. In 2nd place, we have the 11th Doctor's Sonic Screwdriver. Now, this one used to be my favourite, and don't get me wrong, it's still incredibly up there. I think this screwdriver is one of the best at communicating the sort of personality of their Doctor. It is perfect for Matt Smith. The whole thing of flicking it open to release these massive claws is something that really works with Matt Smith's performance and the way that he uses his hands. I really love the copper finish and the leather to hold on to. That feels really natural to me. I love the shape of the emitter, not just being a circle, but a sort of weird like droplet thing, which is very similar to the time rotor of the 2010 TARDIS as well, which I think is very much intentional because this Sonic was built by the TARDIS, which makes a lot of sense, especially with the copper and metal also looking quite similar. A cool little feature about this Sonic that not many people know is that it was intended to have like a dummy button at the bottom of the screwdriver that was supposed to have a bunch of different use cases, but we never really knew what those were. Something that I do also often associate with this Sonic is the Doctor using the Sonic sideways to read what's going on. That was also present on the 9th and 10th Doctor Sonic Screwdriver. However, I really think it's used more often with the 11th Doctor Sonic Screwdriver. Even though there isn't really a display to read anything off of, it's still fun to just see him flip it sideways and read it in a way that it's kind of communicating something to him that we can't see as the audience. Yeah, to me this Sonic perfectly sort of bridges the gap between sort of being a more elaborate design whilst also being simplistic enough to not feel overwhelming. The closed and open versions almost look like different devices, and in my head I always imagined that the extended version would be used for more precise kind of aiming and functionality, whereas the closed version was for more general usage. I don't know whether that was ever confirmed to be the case, that's always just been my headcanon towards it. However, as much as I love the 11th Doctor Sonic Screwdriver, it doesn't take my first place. My first place goes to the 9th and 10th Doctor's Sonic Screwdriver. To me, I don't think Sonic Screwdriver design can get much stronger than this. It's simple, it's elegant, timeless, and effective. We have the crackle design along the body, which I really think does work with the more earthy, grounded nature of the 2005 revival. We have the bright blue emitter as well as the metal cage sections, as well as the bottom section, which actually does look like a piece of medical equipment as well. It's quite short, actually, in comparison to a lot of future new series Sonic Screwdrivers, and part of me kind of wishes that they'd stuck to that, because I feel it kind of makes this feel like a more compact piece of tech that would be more convenient to use. I also love the sort of cabled insides where this Sonic is extended. I think that looks really cool. And the fact that its design holds up even all these years later is kind of indicative of how well this thing is designed and how I really think it could fit into almost any period of the show. But that wraps up my ranking of the Sonic Screwdrivers from Doctor Who. Do you agree with my list? What are your thoughts on the Sonic Screwdriver's design? Comment down below, please like the video if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you later. Don't forget to click below to subscribe to the official Harry's YouTube channel.